the 6th century BCE. Under the bright Sicilian sun, which makes polished bronze shine with a blinding glare, the Athenian engineer Perillus proudly presents his creation to the tyrant Phalaris. This is not just a statue. It is the pinnacle of engineering, a bronze bull of perfect proportions. But its true purpose is revealed in the details. Perillus explains, it is both an execution furnace and a musical instrument. Inside the bull, hollow and fitted with a complex system of pipes, a person is slowly roasted. Their screams of agony, passing through the acoustic mechanism, are transformed into the melodic, prolonged roar of an enraged beast. Phalaris listens in silence. Then, instead of praise, he delivers a cold verdict. Perillus must personally demonstrate the acoustics. The inventor becomes the first victim of his own genius. Was this merely the cruel whim of a tyrant? Or was there a systemic logic hidden in this act, explaining why power so often seeks not just to kill, but to turn suffering into a public performance? The story of Perillus is not an exception, but a key to understanding an entire system. It leads us to two mysteries that defy modern logic. The first paradox: what explains the fact that victims of Persian Scaphism, sentenced to an agonizing death by insects, were force-fed honey and milk for 17 days? Why care so meticulously for a person's life if the ultimate goal is their death? The second paradox: how could Chinese executioners use opium, a powerful painkiller, during the execution of lingchi, known as death by 1,000 cuts? Their goal was not to alleviate pain, but to ensure the victim remained conscious for as long as possible, watching their own dismemberment. These are not senseless acts of sadism. They are elements of a deliberate technology of power, and the answers to these questions will reveal its true mechanics. This investigation is not a mere catalog of horrors. Its purpose is to answer the main question: why? Why did civilizations that created the Parthenon and the Great Wall invest just as much genius into inventing hell on Earth? By the end of this film, you will stop seeing these methods as mere barbarism. You will learn to recognize three key elements within them: a technology designed to prolong agony, a political tool that turns fear into a message, and even a gruesome form of art that makes death a spectacle. We will dissect these executions not as exhibits in a museum of horrors, but as functioning mechanisms, as if dismantling a clock to understand how each gear serves the overall purpose. This knowledge provides a key to how fear works as a tool of control in any era. Our investigation will follow a clear map. This is not a chaotic collection of facts, but a systematic dissection of the system. In just 4 minutes, we will delve into Persian Scaphism and reveal how the human body could be turned into a self-sustaining ecosystem for insects. This is the answer to our first paradox. At around the 15-minute mark, we will find ourselves in Imperial China. Here we will understand how the lingchi execution was designed to destroy not only the body, but also the soul in the afterlife. This is the answer to our second paradox, and toward the end, at the 20-minute mark, we will assemble all the evidence and prove that this entire horror evolved into a form of public performance. We will unveil the concept of the aesthetics of death. In 4 minutes, you will learn how honey and milk became the most terrifying weapons in the hands of Persian executioners. Honey and milk. Not weapons, but food. Yet it is this detail, recorded by Plutarch, that shatters the logic of punishment. Why force-feed someone you are killing? The mechanism seems primitive. 2 boats serve as a sarcophagus. The body is inside with only the head, hands, and feet exposed. Everything is smeared with honey and milk. But the reality was brutally stark. The process could last up to 17 days. This turned the execution into a biological project where the victim was a resource. Force-feeding was the fuel for this system. The main horror was not in the bites. The victim died from septic shock and gangrene. Their body, overflowing with waste, would begin to rot from the inside, becoming an incubator for worms. The Persians didn't make nature attack from the outside. They forced the body to devour itself. Plutarch was a moral philosopher, but his description is striking in its cold-blooded detail. The first layer of horror was physical: the heat, the bites, the immobility. But the psychological aspect was more terrifying: the complete loss of control over one's body, which became alien, turning into food. It was a slow erasure of the boundary between self and decay. The execution did not happen in isolation. It was a public spectacle. Unbearable humiliation was added to the torment. The person still alive became an object of revulsion for passers-by. They ceased to be human long before physical death. The true goal was not death, but dehumanization. Scaphism was a technology for turning a person into a thing. If you had lived at that time and walked past, what would you have felt? Compassion, fear, or satisfaction? Why was this complex method necessary? The explanation lies in the symbolic realm. The criminal was not killed by an executioner, but was given to nature to be devoured. This created the illusion that the person was not executed, but consumed by chaos, partially relieving the executioners of moral responsibility. But this was not an evasion of responsibility. It was a powerful political statement. Scaphism was a message. We control not just your life, we control the very process of dying. It was a demonstration of power over biology. Scaphism is an example of organic cruelty disguised as a natural process. But cruelty can also be mechanical. The key to the next level lay in transforming biology into physics and decay into acoustics. Scaphism is absolute biological terror. Its logic is to amplify the natural processes of decay, forcing the body to become a weapon against itself. Now, a sharp contrast. Where the Persians used the living and the rotting, the Greeks, in their darker manifestations, used the inanimate, metal, fire, and the laws of physics. It was a leap from using nature to imitating and improving it with technology. This step takes us directly to Sicily, to the court of the tyrant Phalaris. We move from marshy shores to a scorching workshop. Here, an execution so perfect was created that its inventor immediately became its first victim. Why did the tyrant Phalaris execute the genius who created a unique weapon for him? To destroy the creator seems illogical, but the essence of acoustic terror is hidden in this irrational act. Perillus of Athens, a brilliant bronze caster, wanted to please the tyrant. Phalaris was seeking a new tool to intimidate his enemies. The bull became the intersection of their ambitions. But the key moment of the story is not the execution itself, but the tyrant's words. Phalaris didn't just kill Perillus. He did so with chilling irony, ordering him to be the first to test the music of his instrument. This was the message. The tyrant holds power not only over people, but over technology itself. Phalaris ordered Perillus to be pulled from the bull while he was still alive and thrown from a cliff. The terror of the bull was not in the fire, but in the sound. How did an empty metal statue become known as the most melodic of torture devices? Its design seems simple: a hollow, life-sized bronze bull, a hidden hatch on the side for the victim. Fire underneath, turning the metal into a furnace where temperatures could reach 400 degrees Celsius. But the main secret was hidden inside. A complex system of pipes and valves was mounted in the bull's head. This acoustic mechanism was designed so that screams of agony, passing through it, were transformed and amplified, becoming like the furious roar of a beast. This technology turned the most terrifying manifestation of suffering into something else, into the music of tyranny. This sound was not intended for the victim, but for those who remained outside. Why complicate the design so much? Why wasn't it enough to simply burn a person? At first glance, the bull was a symbol of Phalaris's own power and fury. Its roar was the voice of authority. But the effect on the crowd was far deeper. Human screams evoke compassion. The roar of a mythical beast evokes awe and terror. The acoustic system worked as a filter. It let pure agony pass through, but the output was a product cleansed of human compassion. The bull made cruelty aesthetically acceptable, turning an execution into a thrilling spectacle. The Greeks learned to turn execution into sound. The Romans, however, went further, turning it into a visual political advertisement. The next empire abandoned complex devices in favor of maximum visibility. The brazen bull is a unique fusion of art, engineering, and cruelty. It is a weapon of psychological control that operates through sound. But it had a flaw. The bull was an expensive, one-of-a-kind device, effective only within a single city. The vast Roman Empire, stretching across 3 continents, needed a tool for mass intimidation. Therefore, the next step in the evolution of cruelty was not complication, but radical simplification. We move from complex acoustics to the simplest geometry, from metal and fire to wood and nails. We are going to study crucifixion not as a religious symbol, but as the most effective political billboard of the ancient world. What was expensive, complex, audible, what it would become: cheap, simple, visible to all. Why did the most powerful and pragmatic empire in the world choose such a slow and bureaucratic-intensive method of execution? Roman legions were famous for their efficiency, but their justice system for non-citizens was demonstratively slow. The logic was not in speed, but in reach. Crucifixion was a tool of social division, a shameful execution, exclusively for slaves, pirates, and rebels. A Roman citizen could not be crucified, but the location of the execution changes everything. Crosses were never placed in secluded spots. They were erected along main roads, at city gates, and at the busiest intersections. After Spartacus's revolt, 6,000 slaves were crucified along the Appian Way. Each one was a living political billboard with a single message: this is what happens to those who go against Rome. Death on the cross did not come from pain or blood loss. What actually killed a person on the cross? The common belief is pain and blood loss from the nails. This is incorrect. The main cause was slow asphyxiation, suffocation. In a suspended position, with arms outstretched, the chest is compressed, and the diaphragm cannot function properly. To take a single breath, the victim had to lift their entire body, pushing up on their nail-pierced feet. And this was a conscious choice, a choice between unbearable, tearing pain in the legs and a sweet but fatal relaxation leading to suffocation. Each breath was like trying to do a pull-up with broken arms and pierced feet. Pushing up provided air, but brought hellish pain. Sinking down brought relief from pain, but took away the air. The Romans forced the body to kill itself, but some cultures entrusted this task to animals and gods. How did an ordinary inhabitant of the empire perceive this shocking spectacle? Merchants, legionaries, and travelers walk along the road. On the side are rows of crosses. For them, it is not a tragedy, but the backdrop to their daily lives. A reminder of power, as familiar as a road sign. Now, the contrast. For the victim, it is the end of everything. Absolute pain, humiliation, and loneliness in the midst of an indifferent crowd. This gap in perception is the essence of dehumanization. Crucifixion worked so effectively because it normalized cruelty, turning one person's agony into a silent lesson for thousands. The crosses stood along the roads, only 30 to 50 meters apart, creating a continuous gallery of terror. This execution was a symbol of human power. The next one was a symbol of divine power. We have seen how cruelty became a technology and a policy. Crucifixion is the pinnacle of pragmatic cruelty, a system designed by humans to control humans. Now let's look at it from another angle. What if the executioner is not a person? What if an animal, an element, or a deity itself serves as the executor of the sentence? This completely changes the perception of justice. This transition leads us to executions where the sentence was left in the hands of the gods. We leave the Roman roads and travel to the jungles of Asia to see how elephants became instruments of monarchical will, and to the bogs of northern Europe, where the mire was considered a gateway to another world. The reason for this was the desire to make the verdict indisputable. The next execution was a demonstration of power not over man, but over the most powerful forces of nature. Imagine an execution where the executioner is not a hired man in a mask, but the most revered animal. In South and Southeast Asia, the elephant was a symbol of wisdom and power. But it was also used as an instrument of justice. At first glance, this is simply a demonstration of the ruler's brute force. A huge animal weighing up to 5 tons kills the condemned on the mahout's command. But a key detail changes everything. Elephants were specially trained for 2 types of execution. They could kill instantly by crushing the head, or they could torture slowly, breaking the bones of the limbs one by one. Whether the sentence would be swift or agonizing was decided by the monarch. This was a demonstration of total control not only over the lives of subjects, but over nature itself. In Asia, nature was made to serve man. In Europe, man was given over to the judgment of nature itself. Why were people drowned in remote peat bogs in Iron Age northern Europe? Archaeologists find their bodies, the so-called bog bodies, thousands of years later. These were not secret murders. Often, objects indicating a sacrifice are found near the bodies. The bodies were deliberately placed in the mire. Anthropology provides the answer. In the beliefs of the ancient Germans and Celts, the bog was a portal between the world of humans and the world of the gods. The acidic environment and low oxygen levels preserved the bodies so well that some finds, 2,000 years old, still have fingerprints. Drowning in a bog was not an execution, but an act of sending the criminal to the final judgment of higher powers. Thus, society absolved itself of responsibility for the verdict. The body was handed over to the gods. But what if one could attack the soul itself? The common logic uniting being crushed by an elephant and drowning in a bog is known as an ordeal, or trial by God. The accused is subjected to a deadly test by fire, water, or wild beast. It is believed that if they are innocent, a deity will intervene and save them. This created the illusion of just a verdict, but it was a system with a predetermined outcome. There was no chance of survival. The ordeal worked like a scale, with a person's life on one side and the will of the gods on the other. And the scale was always rigged in advance. The ritual form made the verdict absolutely legitimate. To dispute such a verdict meant going against the will of the gods. It was an ingenious way to disguise human will as divine justice. But the most sophisticated execution was aimed not at the body, but at the complete erasure of the person from the afterlife. We have witnessed how nature itself becomes the executioner. These executions serve 2 purposes. They shift moral responsibility from humans to higher powers and give cruelty a sacred, indisputable meaning. Here, the attack is directed at the physical body. Now, a transition to a new metaphysical dimension of horror. What if one could destroy not only the physical shell, but also inflict such damage on the body that, according to beliefs, it guarantees the destruction of the soul in the afterlife? This question leads us to Imperial China. to the execution of lingchi, known as death by 1,000 cuts. It was a procedure designed for the complete erasure of a person from existence, and it was so ritually important that the victim was prevented from dying prematurely through the use of opium. Why give opium, a powerful painkiller, during the most excruciating execution in history? It seems like an act of hidden mercy. The executioner methodically slices off small pieces of flesh. Without a stimulant, the victim would quickly lose consciousness from the shock of the pain. Opium, it would seem, was needed only to ensure the body survived until the end of the sentence. But its true purpose was the opposite. Opium was administered to guarantee the victim would not pass out. They would be fully conscious, a passive spectator to their own deconstruction. This transformed the execution from a physical torture into a psychological one, where the mind, trapped, was forced to watch the destruction of its vessel. The sentence could include up to 3,000 cuts. What crime deserved such a punishment? Lingchi was used for patricide or high treason, the ultimate sins against Confucian ethics. The logic seems ironclad. For absolute evil, absolute punishment. But the execution could last for hours. This is inefficient. It is not murder, but a public ritual stretched out over time, where each of the 3,000 cuts was part of a grim ceremony before a crowd. The real goal of this spectacle was not pain, but metaphysical annihilation. Why was the integrity of the body after death more important than life itself in ancient China? The answer lies in ancestor worship. For a spirit to find peace and become a revered ancestor, the body had to enter the afterlife intact. This was the guarantee of the soul's eternal life. Lingchi turned this belief into a weapon. By destroying the body, the executioner deliberately condemned the soul to eternal oblivion. An intact body was to the soul what a seed is to a plant. Without an undamaged shell, the sprout of a future life in another world could not emerge. This is an execution that kills 3 times. It erases a person from the present, shames them in the past, and destroys them in the future. We have seen the biological horror of Scaphism, the engineering terror of the bull, and the metaphysical erasure of lingchi. What unites them? At first glance, only different ways to inflict pain. But their main goal was directed not at the victim, but at the witnesses. All these executions were public acts. Their calculated cruelty was intended to create an indelible impression on the minds of the crowd. These are not methods of killing. They are different forms of psychological weaponry, designed for total control. How can you kill a person twice? We have seen physical death. But where is the second death here? The answer lies in the concept of the second death. This is not a physical, but a social act. The destruction of a person's name, reputation, and memory. Crucifixion turned a rebel's name into a synonym for shame for generations. Lingchi erased a person from the ancestor cult, condemning their soul to eternal oblivion. Scaphism deprived the victim of even a human appearance. Power created a system where the condemned had only 2 paths: to be completely forgotten or to be forever remembered as a monster. The physical execution was just the first downpour. Shame and oblivion slowly washed away the very ground on which the individual once stood. But whence this obsession with publicity? Why not execute enemies secretly and efficiently? A secret execution eliminates one person. A public one controls thousands of witnesses. But this is only part of the truth. The crowd, by attending the execution, became not just a spectator, but a silent accomplice. Its presence legitimized the violence, creating the illusion of popular wrath. Major executions in imperial capitals could draw tens of thousands of spectators. Each of them became a carrier of the virus of fear. They went home and recounted what they had seen, becoming a free tool of state propaganda. But fear is understandable. Was there something else, for example, pleasure? How could an execution be entertainment? A festive atmosphere often prevailed at the execution site. Food vendors, entire families with children. At first glance, this is simply a manifestation of bloodlust in a world without modern shows. But the psychology of the process was more complex. The execution was a form of live theater. It was a drama with a villain, a hero in the form of justice, and a shocking finale with a real death. The air was filled not only with screams, but also with the smell of roasted food and the buzz of an excited crowd. This created a complex psychological cocktail of fear, righteous anger, curiosity, and immense relief. Thank God it's not me. It was this mixture that made execution such a powerful tool. What do we have in the end? Execution is a psychological weapon, a propaganda tool, and a form of public show. If you put these pieces together, the answer to the main question begins to emerge. Why so much ingenuity? Because the goal was not simply to kill, but to create a work that would remain in memory for centuries. Physical pain was just one layer. The main thing was the psychological impact on the crowd and the metaphysical destruction of the individual. We have put together three key elements: weapon, propaganda, and show. At its peak, sophisticated execution ceased to be merely the craft of an executioner. It became a form of cruel but, in its own way, captivating art. How could an act of murder become a form of art? The very combination seems sacrilegious. But the facts refute any utilitarian explanation. This is the concept of the aesthetics of death, turning execution into a spectacle, subject to the laws of drama, composition, and audience impact. The brazen bull was not just a roaster. It was a sculpture and a musical instrument, where a series of bronze tubes turned screams of agony into a melodic roar. Lingchi was not just butchery. It was a ritual dance with strict choreography. Crucifixion was not just a post. It was a living installation against the backdrop of the sky. Power sought not just to punish, but to create a powerful image that would affect emotions as strongly as a great work of art. Who was the director of these bloody performances? The tyrant Phalaris was not just a ruler, but a producer who sought new forms for his theater of horror. He invested in technologies of intimidation. But he was only the client. The executor was the engineer Perillus of Athens, who created a masterpiece of cruelty. And he also became its first victim. This act proves that power created a whole market for the art of agony, attracting talent. This system generated a demand for cruelty, turning it into a craft. The executioner in China was a master. Perillus was an engineer. But for any performance, an audience is needed. Why did the crowd need this art? Why didn't the crowd turn away but watch mesmerized? The answer lies in the psychological mechanism of catharsis. Observing the suffering of others in a controlled, just setting allows the spectator to release their own suppressed fears. It was a collective ritual. By destroying the criminal's body, the crowd symbolically cleansed its world, reaffirming the righteousness of its laws. This catharsis worked like an exhale after holding one's breath for a long time. By watching the execution, society exhaled its accumulated tension. The art of cruelty did not destroy society, but strengthened its order through a collective experience of horror. So, cruelty is an art. Ancient civilizations invested so much genius in executions because they were solving not a utilitarian task of killing, but an aesthetic and political one, creating an unforgettable performance to manage the masses. This is the answer to the main question of our investigation. But it gives rise to a new, much more disturbing question. Has this need for spectacular cruelty disappeared with the abolition of public executions? Or has it simply changed its form, migrating to online harassment, reality shows, and news headlines. In conclusion, we will look into this ancient mirror that we have just assembled and understand what it says about us today. Our investigation has come full circle, tracing the sinister evolution of thought. We began where nature itself was the executioner, on the Persian shores, where Scaphism turned the body into an ecosystem for insects, and in the Asian jungles, where elephants delivered justice. This was the first stage, the subjugation of nature. Then we saw how human genius moved from using nature to imitating and improving it. We found ourselves in a Sicilian workshop, where the brazen bull turned the laws of acoustics into a weapon, and on Roman roads, where crucifixion became a soulless conveyor belt of visual propaganda. This was the second stage, the creation of machines. Finally, we reached the highest point of abstraction in Imperial China, where the lingchi execution was aimed not at the body, but at the complete erasure of the soul from the afterlife. This was the third final stage, ritual art. This entire evolution led to one peak, to the concept of the aesthetics of death. Now we can return to the two mysteries with which we began and give them final answers. Why was the victim of Scaphism force-fed honey and milk for up to 17 days? The answer is simple and terrifying. Not to prolong life, but to prolong decay. The body had to become more effective fuel for the torture, a self-sustaining incubator for worms. Why did Chinese executioners give opium during the death by 1,000 cuts? Not out of mercy, but to ensure that the main spectator of this performance, the victim themselves, would not lose consciousness and miss a single act of their methodical destruction. The mind had to remain trapped, observing the deconstruction of its body. These details are not paradoxes. They are key elements of the script, deliberate technologies that turned execution into a performance where suffering was the main special effect. All of this proves the main disturbing thesis of our investigation. Sophisticated cruelty is not a sign of barbarism. It is a product of the most developed civilizations of their time, their dark achievement. It required deep knowledge of engineering, biology, psychology, and ritual art. The line between civilization and savagery turned out to be not the absence of cruelty, but how elaborately it was organized, packaged, and justified by higher goals, the will of the gods, justice, or state security. Civilization is a thin layer of ice on a deep lake. On the surface, everything seems solid and orderly, but beneath it always lies a primal cold depth. The technologies have changed, but the psychology of control and the thirst for public condemnation remain. This mirror reflects not only the past, but also our present. And this presents us with a final choice that concerns everyone. At the center of this drama are always two figures. The first, a lone inventor, like Perillus, whose genius can design and create an unimaginable instrument of torture. The second, a faceless but all-powerful crowd that applauds its use and demands a spectacle. After everything you have seen, answer this for yourself. What scares you more? The cold, rational ingenuity of a genius who creates hell on earth, or the hot, enthusiastic roar of a 1,000-strong crowd demanding this performance? Write a single word in the comments. Inventor or crowd? This choice is not just an answer. It is the beginning of the most important discussion about the nature of evil that we must have today.